Hello, this is the World of the 20th Century podcast, and I'm your professor, Adam Polk. History.
Lesson 7, Chapter 15, Europe, Integration and Disintegration. Chapter 15 examines the growing integration of Europe as a unit in the 1980s and 1990s, as well as the tragic disintegration of the Balkans region with the dissolution of the state of Yugoslavia, with nationalist wars and episodes of ethnic cleansing. The integration of many European states, culminating in the European Union, or EU, has been one of the most important global and economic developments since World War II. There were several developments since the Second World War that fostered growing cooperation among European states, though there were, too, the divisions of the Cold War. The Marshall Plan was a transnational program which required European states taking the massive American loans to coordinate their policies. For Western European nations, the security concerns during the Cold War led to the creation of NATO. Peace and security aims underlay European fear that the Americans would retreat back to splendid isolation after the war and leave Western Europe vulnerable to the Soviet Union. In the economic sphere, there were attempts at closer integration soon after the war, based on the need to compete. In 1951, the European Coal and Steel Community was established to create a common market for coal and steel between Belgium, West Germany, France, Italy, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. In 1957, the European Economic Community was created to coordinate economic policies for agriculture, transport, and so on of those states which signed on. This was the forerunner of the European Union. As the text points out, the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union presented new challenges to the project of greater European integration. Would the established Western European members of the club keep the door open for their Eastern cousins so recently freed from 40 years of enforced communist rule? There were, of course, certain benchmarks that candidate countries needed to achieve in terms of human rights, democratic institutions, a market economy, and so on. However, there was also the potential problem of how these much poorer countries, should they be admitted to the EU, might affect its structure, as wages and the price of agricultural products in these former communist states, for instance, were much lower than in the more developed Western European nations. One of the particularly interesting problem countries for the EU is Turkey. On the one hand, Turkey has been a long-standing member of NATO, has developed a market economy, and long-standing democratic institutions. But there is a great reluctance to admit Turkey to the club. There is the point that Turkey's traditional rival and enemy Greece has helped keep Turkey from joining. But there is also the more troubling sentiment among many European nations that Turkey is simply and fundamentally not European. The subtext here is though Turkey be a modern, secular nation, it is also a Muslim nation, not a Christian nation, and therefore not European. This is not about religious doctrine or belief per se, but the cultural and worldview identities attached to the European Christian tradition versus the former Ottoman Empire Turkish tradition. The second major topic analyzed in the chapter is the terrible wars and ethnic conflict which occurred in the Balkan Peninsula in the early 1990s. If you remember your history about the First World War, you might remember that the Balkans was a dangerous cauldron of nationalist aspirations during the first 2 decades of the 20th century. Indeed, it was a Bosnian Serb nationalist, Gavrilo Princip, who assassinated the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austrian throne, in the summer of 1914. The following events led to the outbreak of World War I, as Austria sought to crush neighboring Serbia. Ethnic tensions, which were often controlled in authoritarian communist states, often came to the boil with the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe. The bloodiest example of this followed the collapse of Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was established in 1918 as the national home for the for the South Slavs, largely the result of Serbia's efforts to unify all Serbs from the former Austro-Hungarian Empire into one state. After World War II, Yugoslavia was restructured as a federal republic with 6 republics: Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, Bosnia, Montenegro, and Macedonia. Within the country there were major religious divisions, with the Serbs being Eastern Orthodox Christian, the Croats being Roman Catholic, and the Bosnian Muslims and Albanians being Sunni Muslim. Becoming a communist state after World War II, the government in Yugoslavia stressed the equality of its constituent peoples. Yugoslavia being beset by many ethnic groups, it was its leader, Tito, who kept the lid on the nationalist aspirations of the different ethnic groups from the end of World War II until his death in 1980. And when he died, there was no one or no force strong enough to keep the peace among the different groups, and the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe precipitated this crisis. As communist states began to crumble around them, Yugoslavian republics began clamoring for change or independence. The president of Serbia, Slobodan Milosevic, called for a Greater Serbia and enlarged Serbia to include Serbs living in neighboring republics. In 1991, Slovenia and Croatia, 2 prosperous northern republics, declared their independence, which led to war as the central government sought to prevent it. Civil war also broke out in the Yugoslavian Republic state of Bosnia-Herzegovina in 1992 over whether it would remain in or secede from Yugoslavia. The Civil War caused the opposition of Serbs living in Bosnia, who did not want the state to secede, because if it did, the minority Serb population would be in a state with a majority Muslim population. Milosevic aided the Serb community in Bosnia with military support. The text explains this in some detail, the nature of the war and the creation of a new horrible phrase, ethnic cleansing.